Welcome to the video. Initially, I have said publicly that I wouldn't upgrade to Cubase 11, and that's because I just didn't see enough value in the update for my needs. It's not to say that it wasn't a bad update. There's some amazing new stock plugins. The integration of spectral layers is really good. A lot of people will find great value in that alone. And there's also been improvements to the export function. We now have Bezier curves, global tracks. And for Mac users, they can rejoice because there's been performance improvements across the OSs. Some of the things I was hoping to see in this update were more so to do with overhauling and updating features that are already inside of Cubase that just haven't been touched for some time and almost feels like they've been neglected a little bit, which is a shame because they're some of the most powerful features of Cubase, but they've yet to reach their full potential. So let's go over some of the things inside of Cubase 11 that bother me at the moment and what I would like to see be done in the future, in future updates. But I'm sure I'm not alone on this one. I'm sure there's quite a few people that would agree with some of my opinions on this. If you're more interested in about the new features and how they work and having an overview of those with Cubase, then I recommend going to check out Chris Salim's video. He's done a cracking video going over all the new plugins, all the new features, and giving you a really in-depth rundown of them. He's also done a really good video on comparing frequency to Pro Q3, which is a well-known equalizer by FabFilter. So I'll put a link in the video for that video actually, so you can hop over and say hello to Chris and watch his updates on Cubase 11. So let's take a look at some of the things that I would have hoped to have seen been updated in this version of Cubase. First of all, let's talk about the Project Logical Editor. The Project Logical Editor is probably the most powerful tool inside of Cubase and is more so utilized by more advanced users. Essentially what this allows you to do is to build your own chain of actions within Cubase and bind them to any key as a macro. So for example, I could create a key that allows me to create a bunch of tracks, name them all, add them all in a folder, color code them, send them to a bus, and also create an effect send from them purely using the Project Logical Editor. So anything that would usually take you 10-15 minutes to set up, you could spend that time creating a macro for in this tool and then bind it to a key, so then you never have to spend that 10 or 15 minutes again doing the same task. The sky's the limit when it comes to using this tool, and once you get your head around it, it really is a big time saver. One of the main issues with the Project Logical Editor is the UI. You are constrained to the predefined dimensions of the UI. It's not rescalable, and this is a real issue, especially when you're creating very complex functions from within the editor and need to continuously scroll up and down in this tiny work area. I feel as though this needs to be really drastically updated in terms of its looks, and I don't think just merely giving this the same graphic as, say, the media bay, the same kind of approach, or when you're searching for presets from within Cubase for something, I don't think that would quite work for this. It needs something a lot more intuitive and quicker to work with. So hopefully Steinberg will pay attention and look at updating this. Track presets in Cubase are a really useful feature. They allow you to select a bunch of different channels with their plugins and settings and save them as a preset that you can recall at any point from the track preset browser in the media bay on the right zone. However, there are some drawbacks to using track presets that stop this from being a really useful feature of Cubase. For example, if I was to select all of these channels and save them as a track preset, I could recall those particular 4 channels and their settings at any point. However, where this starts to fall apart is if you want to use this in a modular way to build templates. For example, when someone gets a new orchestral library, they will probably sit down, create all the instrument tracks, set up all the outputs to group buses and effect sends, and have it ready to go. Now, if you wanted to recall your instrument tracks with their group settings and their effect settings, and have them inside of a folder and save that as a preset, you cannot do that inside of Cubase, even in Cubase 11. So, for example, let's say I just wanted all my woodwinds, XYZ, or brass or whatever from Hollywood Orchestra. I could go over here, click on it, drag and drop it into the project, and then enable the tracks and start working. However, I would still then need to go ahead and create all my folders and groups, subgroups, and effect sends. If Cubase just let you save a track preset with folders included, group channels included, effects and VCA included, this would be a huge deal. It would massively improve workflow for people working on big templates because they know that they could have them set up the way they want. They don't have to use track archives to try and import sections of a template they've previously built. They could use the track preset browser in such an intuitive way. I mean, here we're trying to connect everything up here. You can see that I've tried to save this now as a track preset, but it won't let me because the folder track's selected. Now, if I was to unselect the folder and save this as a track preset, it will let me do that and we can name it whatever we like. However, when we come to recall this track preset from the right zone browser, it's not going to let us have groups and effects. So let me drag and drop it in, and boom, you can just see it's loaded up the instrument channels and forgot about everything else. Now, the other thing with track presets that's really annoying is that if you notice when I click on these different patches here, you'll see that the symbol pops up for loading briefly. And that's because Cubase will load every single patch that you've saved in that track preset to try and generate a preview that you can use with your keyboard to check out before dropping it in. Which, you know, it's a cool idea, but it has some very bad performance ramifications, especially when you're working on a larger project and you click on something with a hell of a lot of things it has to load up. And you could get a sudden spike in RAM and CPU usage, which could potentially crash your project if you're pretty much on the edge of system resources anyway. And it may not seem like a big deal, but there's still no way to disable this inside of Cubase 11. So really, you should be able to by now. The only workaround for this is by selecting your tracks before you save them and disabling the tracks entirely. And that way, when you click on it, Cubase won't load anything, although you can see it's still trying to do something. Now, finally, while we've got the track preset browser open, one thing that bothers me about the Media Bay is that it becomes quite sluggish. And this is something that I really ran into initially when doing the Hollywood Orchestra template. And because there's a lot of track presets, I noticed the more track presets you save, even if they're disabled and nothing's loaded in the actual project file, you find that the Media Bay tends to become more slow, and it takes longer at saving presets and populating it inside of the media browser and also inside of the right zone. So there seems to be some kind of performance thing happening with the Media Bay where it does actually slow down. And that's partly the reason why I never have a load of track presets in the browser, because of that. It slows down in the Media Bay, which is weird because even when you've got nothing loaded in your project, it still tends to act fairly sluggish. So maybe there's some improvements to be done there with the coding of how it works. I don't know, but all I can tell you is that it is a bit of an issue. Something else that's happened on older versions of Cubase, I can't really vouch for it in this one, is that when you try to batch name or batch update anything from within the Media Bay, sometimes it doesn't apply the values that you've set out, and you then have to go back in and select everything individually to apply the new values. Again, I haven't really checked that in Cubase 11 yet, so I won't comment on it, but for 10.5 and anything below, this seems to be a thing that's happened to me quite a few times. Expression maps inside of Cubase Pro have always been a very unique and powerful feature, allowing you to set up articulation key switch changes for different libraries that you work with and have that information independent from the piano roll to program in. However, the downside of working with expression maps is the workflow. What you would do is create a new map from within the expression map setup. Then for every single key switch of the sample library, you would create a new slot. So let's say there's 5 switches available in the patch, you'd create 5 slots. And then for each one of these slots, you'd create an output mapping like so. Then you would change the output note value to match that of the key switch you wish to trigger from the library. So if the switch started at C1, you'd put that as C1, the next one will be C#1, etc, etc. However, what's really annoying about this is that it doesn't automatically populate a default output based upon what you do in the sound slots. What would be nice to do is that if you could remotely, see, I like to do this, I like to use the remote notes to set the key range of all the things. So if that one starts at C1, I can set remote keys and then it will change all the rest for me. But I still then need to add the output mapping to make sure the triggers work. So what I would do is cut this and paste it here. And I'd do this for each patch slot. Now you can see how this starts to get a little bit tedious, especially if you're building a lot of maps for an entire library that has a lot of maps and switches in them. It can start to become a little bit annoying after a while. And the other thing is, before the map actually works, you need to give it an articulation. So the quickest way is to click on it and then you can choose a technique, but not all of the techniques are listed here for a lot of the things that some patches do. So what you tend to end up having to do is add a custom articulation, and then you come down here, click on it, and then you type it out on the legato. And that means now in the articulations and dynamics lane of your piano roll, it would actually show up the key switch. Now, if you don't do it, it won't show it up. But you need to go through each one of these and name name what it is. And there's a lot of typing, a lot of clicking, and it's a little bit annoying. Really, it should automatically, once you've named, your slot name, it should be able to automatically do that for you. I don't know, there seems to be just something with the workflow with the expression maps that I just feel like there's one too many steps to do something very simple, and it does need looking at, I feel, and updating, purely because it does tend to waste a lot of your time trying to set those up. I mean, getting from A to B is great, it still lets you get from A to B. However, the amount of time that you spend is far greater than it needs to be. If the workflow was streamlined, a good portion of that time spent building expression maps could be reinvested back into doing other things on your project. Now, one of the other things inside of Cubase that has been requested for some time is being able to freeze multiple tracks. Now, when you freeze a track, it basically unloads the instrument from RAM and unloads the plugins, but generates an audio preview so you can still hear the track. But if you want to do any changes to the MIDI or to the plugins themselves, then you'll need to enable it and work on them as usual, then refreeze them afterwards. But freezing tracks is great for saving up some resources on your machine. Really good feature of Cubase. However, what lets it down a little bit is that you cannot multi-freeze. You can only freeze one track at a time. And one of the requests has been for some time now to upgrade this feature so you can multi-freeze track presets. And what would make this even better is if they also provided the option to multi-freeze as a key command, so you could work it into your own custom macro chains for Project Logical editor functions to mass select and freeze specific channels. One of the most frustrating and disappointing integrations of a feature in Cubase is the addition of snapshots. The idea of it is excellent, and being able to preview different mix settings is really useful. However, where this drastically falls apart is the fact that they don't recall any automation data. And for people that do a lot of mixing, you will tend to use automation a lot, not just for volume rides and changes, but for plugins as well, and automating different functions of the plugins to happen at key points. Now, if you want to compare a mix with two different sets of automation going on, there's no way to do it with snapshots because, again, it doesn't recall automation data. And to prove a point here, I'm going to create a couple of plugins. Now we're going to create a snapshot. Now we're going to open up one of the audio inserts here. We're going to hit the read and write function. And we're just going to do something like this. Okay. And now go back to the mixer. You can see the automation there for it. We're going to go back to the mixer, create another snapshot. Now, if I change back to the initial snapshot we come up with, it's still keeping the automation data there from the previous one, which is what we don't want. The only time it takes it away is on the snapshot where I've actually, got no plugins on, and then when we load back up to this one, again, it's just completely deleted all the automation for everything. You can always use Control and Z to bring it back. However, automation is a really important part of mixing, so not being able to save this as a part of a snapshot is a little bit disappointing. In version 9 of Cubase, the track pictures box used to scale perfectly to the width of the channel, so you would always have a nice big icon even when you were at maximum width on the faders. However, in Cubase 10, they changed this and made it smaller, and even now in Cubase 11, the problem still persists and you have tiny graphics. So let me just load in one of my custom icons and show you how big we can scale this box up. Now in Cubase 9, the size of the box would remain relative to the width of the fader. So this box here should be at least twice the height and be more squared to fill out the width as well. However, it just doesn't want to do it in the newer versions of Cubase, which is an absolute shame because it makes the graphics look a little bit weird and not as visually useful as it was in V9. While we're in the mixer, another feature I was hoping to see in Cubase 11 was the ability to rearrange the channels via drag and drop, but also have the option to do two additional things. The first one being, when you rearrange the channels in the mixer, it stays separate from the project window, so nothing changes in terms of the hierarchy in the project window. It'd also be cool if you had an option where you could also have it follow the project window, so when you move any channels around in here, it'll also move them around in the main project window as well. Just a little thing I would have liked to have seen, and I think the drag and drop functionality is something that has been requested quite a lot for the mixer, so maybe we will get that in another update. It'd be nice to see it in the future though. Finally, one of the features I missed from Cubase 9, which seems to have disappeared across the newer versions of Cubase, is that if you shift selected channels in the mixer, you could then go to the color options and batch color all of these in the mixer, which you do on older versions of Cubase, but not since version 10 and above, which is a little bit weird because this is actually very useful, especially if you're creating a template or tracks via, you've got one instrument track, you're using MIDI tracks to connect to the rest of the patches, but then you're also creating the outputs in the mixer. So you'd have to, do them individually most of the time, which is a little bit annoying. I would like to see that one back inside of a patch for Cubase. I'm sure that'd be very simple to add in. But yeah, it's a random one that seems to be missing. Another one that annoys me in Cubase, which is still prevalent in Cubase 11, is to do with the toolbar at the top here. So if you're running on a 1080p screen and you want to have quite a lot of tools enabled, watch what happens when I keep adding them. They disappear into the ether. They've gone behind here. They've all vanished. Yeah. They could have at least made it so this has a pop-down bar at the bottom to add the extra tools on that are not showing up, instead of allowing it to become this mess. But because not many people tend to have many tools loaded up in the bar, it's one of those where you think, oh, we don't have to fix it because no one's really complained about it that much. But still, it should be not an issue. Things like this should get tested and they should get fixed. And I know I'm nitpicking, but it's been like that since version 10. There's no excuse really. Now I know it might seem like I'm bashing Steinberg with this video, but I'm not. It comes from a place of love. I want to see the best for this DAW, and it does disappoint me when I see that they fall short on certain things when they do these updates. Now I know sometimes my opinions can be frowned at, or they might seem a bit over the top, but I'm part Italian and Irish. I get passionate about things that I love. I can't help it. And sometimes it's just easy to fire off opinions before you've actually fully investigated them. And that's something we're all guilty of, but for me, I'm just going to blame it on my heritage. Every single DAW on the market is a good DAW. You can make music with any of them. You can get from A to B in any DAW. They're all good. The only difference is the workflow they use to get from A to B. But also what is true to that is that each DAW provides you with tools from getting to A to B. Yes, but hear me out. Depending on what you want to do, if you're just recording 4 tracks and using a couple of synthesizers and that, you're not going to need to use and utilize the tools that others may need when they're building massive projects with thousands of tracks. They're using sample libraries. They need to utilize all the advanced features of the software to get from A to B. And when those features start to fall short, it increases the amount of time it takes to get from A to B. Yes, you can still make your music, but it's costing you more time because those workflows are not as refined and not as intuitive as they should be. And for independent people that don't have the luxury of hiring technicians and template builders at a whim to sort all this stuff out for them and put up with all those headaches, it becomes a frustrating back and forth process with using a DAW. So that is the argument for me. I could quickly make a 4-track, 5-track song with drums, bass, guitar and vocals and in Cubase and mix it. No problem. If I want to make a really massive project, then yes, it's going to take a little bit more time naturally, but I don't want to be spending more time than I need to get from A to B. So that's why I point these things out inside of Cubase, because they do affect how much time you are spending sometimes and causing frustrations and finding workarounds. You shouldn't really need to do it. So it'd be nice if some of the future updates for Cubase address those that work with bigger projects and that, to make them slightly a little bit more simpler and quicker to set up and more manageable with things, because that would make everybody's life happier at the end of the day. And I think in general it's healthy to have these kind of videos and conversations where you're expressing what you like and what you don't like and what could be changed and what can be improved upon, because if nobody does that, then everyone's just going to be going how amazing this product is or that product is, and the developers will just be like, okay, we'll just give them more of that. We won't actually do anything to improve upon it because people are happy. Progress is made when people discuss what could be made better, not ignore it. So for me, it makes total sense to have these type of conversations. However, the one thing that annoys me the most is not so much when developers don't do something or they do something wrong. It's more so around having these types of conversations where we're honest with what we like and what we don't like and having a constructive conversation about it. There are times, even I've experienced, where you go onto public forums or places and you try and discuss these things and you always get these knob jockeys that just simply get their back up because you've mentioned something negative or seemingly negative about their favourite developer, and then it just turns into a scat throwing contest where they're like, well, Cubase is shite because it doesn't do this, Reaper is superior because of this, or Pro Tools is superior in this and you're an idiot if you don't use it. It's just so childish. It's such low resolution thinking. And when, someone doesn't like another person, they try and have one of these conversations, you always find one of them tends to try and shit in their hands and clap in front of the other's face, because it makes them feel better about themselves when they feel like they've just got one up on someone they don't particularly agree with. And everyone at some point in their life has tried to do this to another individual. However, it's not healthy and it doesn't help anyone. So if you guys want to have a discussion about the pros and cons of different DAWs and comparing them with Cubase in the comments below, make sure you're being respectful when you do it. Bit of a long video this one, I know, so thank you for sticking with me through it, and I will see you all next time.